F.R.Leavis's The Great Tradition was published in 1948. It changed how people judged novels. Before Lewis, most people treated novels as light entertainment or loose collections of characters and stories. Few critics took novels as seriously as they took Shakespeare's plays or Milton's poetry. Lewis changed this. He declared that the novel is a supreme art form that can change how we understand life itself. He opened with one of the most aggressive statements in literary history. The great English novelists are Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James, and Joseph Conrad. With one sentence, he created a very exclusive club. Lewis does not care about popularity, commercial success, or clever storytelling. For him, a novel is great only if it meets two deeply connected demands. First is vital capacity. A great novelist must have an extraordinary sensitive openness to human experience. They cannot be cold academics looking down from a distance. They must care deeply about the messy, real texture of life, psychological struggles, social relationships, and everyday existence. The book must feel alive. Second is moral intensity. Simply describing life vividly is not enough. A great writer must be driven by serious moral concern. This does not mean preaching or judging. It means an ongoing, anxious focus on human choices, values, and spiritual health. A great novel makes us reflect on how to live, how our choices affect others, and what it means to be a responsible human being. Without this moral urgency, Lewis calls a book trivial. Lewis famously attacks the idea of art for art's sake. This old movement argued that art should be judged only on its style, beauty, and technical cleverness, with no duty to teach morals or reflect real life. Lewis rejects this completely. He criticizes the French novelist Flaubert and the Irish modernist Joyce. He admits they were technical geniuses who spent years polishing sentences. But he argues that their devotion to style came at a terrible cost, the sacrifice of life itself. Flaubert's work, in Lewis's view, is cold, cynical, and hollow. Joyce's Ulysses is brilliant but ultimately a dead end, an overcomplicated puzzle that lacks a real interest in human moral growth. For Lewis, style is never an end in itself. Form and technique only matter when they deepen our understanding of real human life. A beautiful sentence about nothing matters less than a rough sentence about something true. If Lewis demands that novels be deeply moral, does he want them to read like sermons or philosophical essays? Absolutely not. This brings us to a key distinction: dramatic enactment versus abstract moralizing. Lewis hates writers who use characters as mouthpieces to shout their personal beliefs at the reader. A novel fails if the author constantly steps on stage to tell us who is good, who is bad, and what lesson to learn. That is lazy moralizing. Instead, a great novel must enact its moral significance. The moral truths must emerge naturally through the story, the dialogue, the psychological conflicts, and the concrete choices of the characters. The author must have impersonality, self discipline that lets characters live out their destinies authentically. We should see the consequences of vanity or self deception through lived actions, not authorial lectures. When a novel achieves this, its ethical dimensions grow organically from the center of the artistic vision. Lewis shows how his four chosen writers form an interconnected lineage. Jane Austen is the foundation. She broke away from loose, sentimental romance conventions and brought sharp, classical self-discipline to the novel. Her irony is not just witty, it is a precision tool for cutting through human vanity and self-deception. George Eliot expanded the canvas. She took Austen's discipline and added wider social complexity and incredible psychological insight. She traces the slow, tiny steps of self deception that lead to bad choices. Her moral intensity is vast. Henry James inherited Eliot's themes. His masterpiece, The Portrait of a Lady, directly took its core moral dilemmas from Eliot's lost novel. James redefined psychological depth into an even more delicate art. However, Lewis warns that James's late period became too obsessed with formal mannerisms, falling into the art for art's sake trap. Joseph Conrad is the most radical inclusion. He was Polish born and learned English as a young adult. But Lewis argues that Conrad absorbed the rigorous moral codes of the British merchant service. His novels explore isolation, guilt, and the fragile nature of civilization. Conrad proves that the great tradition is not about national origin, but about moral and artistic seriousness. One of Lewis's most shocking moves is his treatment of Charles Dickens. He largely excludes Dickens from the absolute core of the great tradition. Lewis admits Dickens was a towering creative force with massive popular imagination, but he argues that Dickens was primarily an entertainer, a genius improviser whose novels were often unstructured, sentimental, and reliant on theatrical caricatures rather than deep psychological realities. However, Lewis makes one historic exception, the short novel Hard Times. He dedicates an entire celebratory chapter to this book. Why? Because in Hard Times, Dickens drops his loose subplots and focuses all his energy on a single devastating critique of industrial capitalism. The cold schoolmaster, Thomas Gradgrind, believes human beings are more calculating machines who should only care about facts and numbers. He crushes imagination, play, and emotional wonder. Lewis argues that in Hard Times, Dickens perfectly enacts his moral significance. The book defends vital human identity against the deadening forces of modern industrial society. It proves that when Dickens disciplined his genius, he could produce the highest order of art. Lewis did not write the great tradition just to give college students a reading list. He viewed literary criticism as a matter of cultural life and death. He was writing after the slaughters of World War II and during the rise of mass media, advertising, and industrial standardization. He feared that Western civilization was sliding into a mindless, mechanized state where people would lose their capacity for deep thought and fine moral judgment. The university English department was the sacred center of cultural preservation. The literary critic is a gatekeeper responsible for keeping the living principle of tradition alive. By creating a strict canon of great literature and forcing readers to engage with writers of supreme moral intensity, Lewis aimed to build an educated community capable of resisting the trivializing forces of mass society. Judging literature is not personal taste, it is a serious act of human responsibility that serves the health of the entire culture. We can summarize Lewis's entire theory into four essential lessons. First, morality and art are inseparable. Greatness requires vital capacity and moral intensity. Second, true art enacts rather than preaches. Ethical truths must emerge naturally through dramatic action, not authorial lectures. Third, tradition is an evolving chain. Austen, Eliot, James, and Conrad form an organic lineage of growing psychological depth and formal refinement. Fourth, criticism defends essential humanity. By celebrating books that vindicate individuality and moral seriousness, we protect our shared culture from mechanical standardization and mindless commercialism.